All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Haley Katzman. I'm the Vice President of Growth at HighSpot. We are a sales enablement platform. And in my role as Vice President of Growth, I lead both our internal enablement and operations for all of our customer-facing teams. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you all today. You might have heard me talk yesterday if you were over at the one of the product marketing sessions. And so this won't be repetitive from the session yesterday, but it's going to focus on kind of building on that. I talked a little bit about yesterday how part of my role, I get to actually go and meet with thousands of different companies and meet with their product marketing, their enablement, their sales teams, and really understand what's working, what's not working, what some of those best practices are, and actually get to go in and kind of consult for some of their businesses. And so really looking forward to sharing some of the insights with you all today. And let's go ahead and get started. All right. So you'll see that the first thing from the first slide that we just looked at to this one, I actually dropped the word sales. And one of the reasons that I did that is that one of the big trends that we're seeing is that enablement is really focusing on more than just sales. And if you think about the entire customer experience, we're seeing teams that are enabling anyone who engages with the customer. So if you think about a sales development team, a services, a success team, support, even partner channel. So kind of the scope of what we talk about today is going to be thinking about enablement supporting all customer-facing teams, not just an AE or an AM type role. So let's talk about some of the challenges for enablement. You guys might have heard some of these stats, but I just wanted to run through them just to kind of set a little bit of context. So if you think about kind of how buyers and customers are evolving, they're becoming more educated, more informed than ever, which is really making it so that all of our customer-facing teams have to basically up-level their game, right? So 74% of buyers choose the rep that was first to provide value or insight. And first is an important piece there, right? Not just the most or that did a better job at the end. It's the first to provide that insight. 76 said that a timely response was extremely important in their decision-making process. And this one totally makes sense. I think a big piece of it is when you think about the constant change that happens within customer-facing teams, whether it's a support team that's moving from one account to another or a rep having a really large pipeline that they're working with, being on top of having that really, really great engagement with customers is super important. Which kind of leads to the third point that 82% of people say that the overall customer experience has a really strong impact on their decision making. And that, if you think about that, kind of sounds obvious, but it's not just about the product or the service that you provide. It's about the experience that you're providing from anyone that engages with the customer. And that's super, super important. I always love this phrase. So modern buyers or even customers don't want to be sold to, they want to be guided. And they will oftentimes have this preference to buy from people that are adding value and can consult them on their purchasing decision, tell them what things they should be looking out for, how to make a purchase within their organization. It's not just about pushing a product or a service. So knowing all of this, if you think about, okay, so we want our reps to be able to provide that first value and insight. They need to be on top of their game. They need to be responding in a timely manner, and they need to be providing an excellent and consistent customer experience from the very first time that we talk to them with marketing all the way until they become a customer, and we're focusing on expansion and adoption, those types of things. There's a lot of things that kind of have to take place to do this really well. And so one of the things that we found is that if you want to be the first to provide that insight, you have to ensure that the people that are supposed to be providing the insight actually have it themselves, right? And a lot of times the content, whether this is customer-facing content, whether it's internal reference materials, whether it's training, it's really, really difficult to land. And I talked a little bit about this yesterday, but if you think from, again, this is relevant to product marketing, but it's also for training reference materials. there's a lot of content messaging and positioning that's being built out, and kind of traditional enablement will have a portal, you'll run webinars, have email blasts, maybe ask the experts one-on-one. But as a result, the content, the messaging, the positioning is not necessarily landing, and we're not the first ones to provide insight, or we're not providing a consistent customer experience. And so the question really is, why is that happening? And so content management absolutely is part of the solution. And I would actually argue that there's a big efficiency play here. It's on average that reps are wasting between 4 and 6 hours per week. So about 20, maybe even more % of their time looking for training, looking for content, looking for the materials so that they can provide that customer experience, so that they can provide that value and insight. That's just not efficient at all. And so having great content management is super important, but it's only part of the solution. So to have great content management, I always say you should treat the resources that your customer-facing teams are using, you should, love them and cherish them just like Amazon does with all of the things that they go out and sell, right? They provide a really great way to be able to search, to browse and filter. It's modern, it's intuitive. There's AI behind it. That's super important. And not a lot of organizations are taking that same approach with the resources that their customer-facing teams need. And so that's all about findability, making it very modern, very intuitive, very easy to use, and using smart systems. Then having the analytics to understand what's being used, what's working, what's not working, so that we can optimize that process. And then having great governance so that as businesses change, as they all do at a very rapid rate, that we are staying on top of that so that we're not making inefficiencies for our customer-facing teams. So this is all extremely important. And again, don't want to diminish this at all, but it is only part of the solution. And so if you think about what that means, if you've only solved part of the solution, you have an issue with efficiency and effectiveness, right? So sales and services can't find the resources that they need, and they can't guide that buyer or that customer to that purchasing decision. Not being effective is different, right? One is wasted time. One is not landing the messaging, positioning, or providing that value. And if they can't find the training, or they're using the wrong content, or they're creating rogue different content when they're going out and engaging buyers, then that's not necessarily going to be effective. And so this is a problem, right? So if you think about, okay, how do we go and solve this, and what's the other missing piece of enablement? There's a key element here that's really around how do we not just provide our customer-facing teams with the resources to provide value, but how do we take what the goals of the business are? So we want to increase our win rate. We want to acquire a new company. We want to add a new product line, cross-sell a new product. How do we take that strategy at a business level, and how do we successfully execute that with all of our customer-facing teams? And that's historically been really hard to do because we can't even get the resources that they need to them very easily, right? And if you think about turning strategy into action through effective customer conversations is actually a really important lens to look at it through, because it's about those first 3 numbers that we looked at in the very beginning. It's about that customer experience. When the customer-facing teams are actually going and having one-to-one conversations with your buyers or with your customers, what are they saying? What are they doing? What are they showing? Because you can do all the training, all the content creation in the world, but if they're not saying the right thing in the conversation, then it's a moot point, right? And so that conversation that they have, that last mile, is critically important. All right, so I'm going to go into a little bit of kind of a framework and how to think about kind of solving this. So you can kind of think there's probably a lot of different scenarios for all of you in this room. Maybe you've recently acquired a new company. Maybe you have a certain competitor that you're really trying to increase your win rate with. You're going into a new industry, a new product line. Kind of put one of those initiatives from a business level in your head so that you can kind of use that as we're going through this. So to kind of set the scope of what we're talking about. So if you think about a business model, you have a product or a service. This is very general. It might be a little bit different for your business, but you have a product or a service. You build out a go-to-market strategy. to take that product or service to market, and then you provide a customer experience. So I'm going to drill into the top right one, into the go-to-market strategy, and how do we actually execute that successfully. So one thing that I mentioned this yesterday, but one thing that is super interesting is that if you think about the go-to-market team, there are those one-to-many engagements and there are one-to-one engagements. And those are they're very different. And so when we're thinking about enablement, I want to kind of focus the scope of what we're talking about to not be around the one-to-many engagements, but solely around the one-to-one. So you have your product or service, you build out your positioning and messaging. You do have one-to-many conversations. Those are critically important, absolutely. But that's not where I'm going to be focusing for the purposes of today. If you think about the one-to-one conversations, you have revenue enablement, whatever you call it. You could call it sales enablement. We call it growth enablement at HighSpot. You can call it whatever you want. Revenue enablement, revenue operations, and then all the customer-facing or revenue teams that are having those one-to-one conversations. And so I'm going to focus on that bottom arrow for what we're talking about today. Okay, so that scenario that you were thinking about, so maybe it's an acquisition or a new product launch or going into a new industry, one of those scenarios. So how do you take that strategy? A bunch of people maybe in a boardroom or sitting around a table said, hey, we should go and do this. And how do you make sure that that lands both internally and with your customers? So I'm going to outline 4 key focus areas that are the steps to be able to execute that go-to-market strategy with your customer-facing teams. So first, you build out the content, customer-facing, internal training materials, reference materials. Then where we're going to focus a lot of today is around you have to write down and you have to build out guidance on how they should use it. It is not enough to throw content over the wall and expect people to know how to use it. It just doesn't work. You have to provide guidance on what they should know, what they should say, how they should use it, when they should use it, what best practices look like. You have to provide some guidance, because if you're not, then they're just coming up with how they should use it on their own today. Then once you've come up with and you've actually written down what the guidance looks like, you have to train people on it. So you have onboarding, you have ongoing training on knowledge, skills, process, and you have to focus on that reinforcement of it. And then you actually go and have the conversation. So what are the workflows that they should use? How should they personalize their messaging, templates, content, whatever it is? And how do you coach to understand, was that a good engagement? Could there be improvements? What are those best practices to get that feedback loop? So if you think about all these 4 things that have to happen to take that go-to-market strategy, let's just say, we acquired a new company. You build out the content around it. You have to provide guidance on what to know, say, show for that acquisition. You have to train people on it, and then they have to go and have that engagement. All these things have to happen, and you have to do them pretty well. If you don't do these well, then you're not going to land that message with your customer, with your buyer. And in all the conversations that I have with, companies ranging from, large enterprise institutions to, high growth startups across many different industries, I think the one that people miss the most is the guidance one. And so that's what I was going to focus on for today. It's surprisingly overlooked. Okay, so I'm going to go into guidance here in a second, but before, I'm going to talk a little bit about the enablement maturity model that we've kind of thought about as it relates to those 4 key focus areas. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. This is actually something that we will do workshops on with the companies that we work with to help them map out where they are from a maturity model perspective, but I thought it would be kind of interesting to show you guys kind of what we think about it. If you think about enablement moving from a reactive function where it's putting out fire drills and just, I've heard so many companies say we're 1-800 help desk, right? Very reactive, to more strategic and helping drive those business initiatives. There's a journey there. There's a maturity model. There's a journey there. And so we've mapped out 4 different value stages in moving from reactive to strategic. Reactive, again, fire drills, putting out fires. Managed, there's a process in place. It's aligned to goals. Optimize is where you're using analytics and insights to make what you're already doing better. And strategic is really, of course, the goal, but we haven't seen a lot of enablement teams here yet. And I think this is something that's really exciting for the space now with the technology that we have and the analytics that we can provide to really help companies become strategic, where you can actually gain insights that will help change the business decisions that you're making based on what you're doing rather than just optimizing what you're already doing. So again, what we've done is we've taken these value stages and we can go through a maturity diagnosis, and then we've actually mapped it to those 4 key focus areas. This is kind of a workshop that we'll take people through. So if it's something that you're interested in, definitely come in, talk to us after. But I wanted to show this because a lot of what I'm going to talk about from a guidance perspective might seem like, oh, that's something that's far away for us. And I think it's something where you do step into this and you might be really evolved from a content perspective and you might not have any guidance, and that's okay. We see companies where they might be optimized on content, reactive on guidance, optimize on training, whatever it is. But this is a good way of thinking about it and kind of breaking out the different focus areas. And you might have different focus areas for your own business, of course. Okay, so focusing on guidance, because that's what the one that I said, I think there's just some low-hanging fruit there. It's a big opportunity for everyone. So if you think about turning that strategy into action with guidance, like I said, content management, critically important, and you have to do it really well. The findability, the analytics, the governance around that, super important, but you have to wrap that in guidance. And you actually have to write down, whether you even just write it down on a piece of paper to start, you actually have to write down for the different selling scenarios or different customer engagements that your team has, what do they need to know? What should they say? What should they show? And what should they do? And I'll talk about those a little bit more, but we've actually come up with kind of this framework of know, say, show, do, and it's worked really well in building a consistent framework and providing guidance for many different scenarios. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about each of those areas. So what to know? What kind of goes into this section? So for what to know, think this is going to be contextual information. Oftentimes it's training, it's knowledge. What do you need to know about the scenario? So let's just say it was that acquisition. What do I need to know about it? Who's the company? How big is it? What's the product? How are we integrating with them? It's all those types of things, right? A lot of times training materials will be in this area. What to say? What are the talking points? Objection handling, landmine questions that you can ask. I always give people the advice, you should actually write it down in the actual way that someone would say it to a customer. Don't tell them like how they should say it, actually write down what they should say in quotes. We'll see call recordings a lot of times in here as well that show examples or best practices of what good looks like. So if you think about, again, acquisition, maybe a 30-second or 2-minute clip of someone talking about, how the two products work together and the solution that you can provide. If it's compete, maybe a couple of talking points and even maybe a recording of how to overcome objections and maybe even a call where someone did overcome an objection really well. So this is a great place to take best practices that you're finding from some of your top performers and actually infuse it into the guidance that you're giving to the rest of the team. And then what to show. So this is going to be what materials, videos, click streams, whatever it is, what should they actually show before the meeting, during the meeting, after the meeting to the buyer, to the customer. And then what to do. I put this one in italics because sometimes there is this section and sometimes it's left out. A really great way that I see this section get used is how many people have a sales methodology that they use within their organization. Okay, for all of you that have that, what to do is for you. So your sales methodology, this is a great place to infuse that. So what do you actually do in that scenario from more of a process perspective? Instead of just training them in the onboarding on what that methodology looks like, you can actually take this and you can put it into a specific scenario so that it's in that moment of action. All right, so one thing that's super important, and like I said, I've kind of gone through like workshops and a lot of conversations with many different companies, and this is always something that's hard for companies to kind of wrap their mind around, but once it clicks, they're like, oh, I totally get it now. So guidance is focused on action. you really have to have empathy for your customer-facing teams and think about the specific scenarios that they're in. So I put a couple of examples up here. So it's aligned to key scenarios. I'm going to I've actually talked about a couple of these scenarios. I'm also going to throw some of them that should not be up there. So you're seeing persona, super popular one. Compete, very, very popular. Industry, customer story, cross-sell, event, process. These are all scenarios. When I say scenario, that means I'm a salesperson or I'm a success person. I woke up in the morning and there's a trigger. I'm going up against a competitor. I'm talking to a specific persona on one of my calls today. It has to be rooted in something that they wake up and they're like, that would make me click on something. That is a scenario. There's a trigger. There is not a dot up here that has content or campaign up here because no one wakes up and says, I'm going to go and send this piece of content, right? That's not how the customer-facing teams think. And so we really need to make sure that we're phrasing it and positioning it in a way that makes sense for our internal audience. All right, so creating and landing the guidance. I've outlined 4 different stages in building out this guidance. And this is kind of a whole world that we've thought really deeply about. So you're getting just a small preview into this. Again, happy to talk further with any of you after this. But if you think about kind of the conversation that we're talking about guidance, we're talking about know, say, show, do, and it's like, okay, great. How do I actually go and do that? Now I want to take that and I want to take it back to my teams. What do I actually go and do? Okay, so the first thing is that you have to be ruthless with prioritization. I cannot emphasize this enough. In some of the other sessions that I've sat in over the past 2 days, this has been a theme that's come up. Focus on 3 things, do it really well. Understand what the priorities are from the stakeholders and make sure you focus on those things. This is super, super important. A thing that's really nice is that with guidance and with these plays that I'm going to talk about, it actually gives you something tangible to show that you're trying to prioritize, whereas without them, it's actually kind of difficult because you're talking about conceptual things that a lot of people don't really know what you're doing. And so this is a really nice way of being able to actually prioritize which of those, like if I go back, which 4 of those do you want this quarter? Pick 4. You can't have all of them, right? And so it's a really nice way of being able to have a conversation around prioritization. Some tips that I'll give here are, what are the GTM priorities? Capacity is super important. So I talk to companies where there might be one person on their enablement team supporting an organization of, or, a customer-facing team of, 1,500, 2,000. I also work with companies where they have, a 50-person enablement team. The capacity of the enablement team that's building the guidance is a thing. You have to be aware of that, and that will be a factor in the prioritization, what your capacity is. The second element of capacity is your audience. So I'll kind of from here on out use the word audience, and that's your internal audience, your customer-facing team. What is the capacity of your audience? They cannot consume, I would argue, more than like 10 to 20 plays at any one point in time. So even if you wanted to give them 50, they probably can't consume that many at one point in time. And you have to figure out what that looks like for your organization. And then the rollout cadence. So for us at HighSpot, we do rolls on a 2-week cadence because we want to roll out the guidance, then have a week to train people on it. It might be something where you do it on a weekly basis, where you do it on a quarterly, even annual, depending on what your business looks like. But there is a frequency in which you can roll out new information, and you have to take all those things into consideration in being able to prioritize. Okay, so you've prioritized, you understand what plays, and I'll show you an example of one of those, but you've decided what plays you want to build out, then you have to actually go and build them. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this area. So I'm going to skip over here, but there's a lot of thought that we've put into this area. Then you have to deliver them. This is where obviously technology comes into place. I would advocate that even if you're not going to use technology, write it down on a piece of paper. If you're not writing it down, they're making it up themselves. But obviously, if you can provide that in moment of action in the workflow in an intuitive way where it's always up to date, it's always fresh, you're going to have a lot more success with it. But at a minimum, just write it down somewhere. And then optimization. So using analytics, of course, this is important that you have something to capture the analytics to be able to do this, but to improve plays effectiveness over time. And this is something where I've really seen a lot of success in companies being able to take a strategy and iterate on it before they've either had success or failure, because they're getting the insights if it's landing internally, if it's landing externally, before they, as an example, miss the revenue number for that acquisition. And so if you get those insights and those analytics, you can actually iterate at a much faster rate. Okay, so thinking about the guidance, and we're going to be talking, we're talking kind of specifically about plays. Who builds it? So I'll kind of jump through this piece pretty quickly, but the moral of the story here that I'm going to paint is that it's not one person building the guidance, and you actually have to get a couple of different people in the room. You have to get, oftentimes, product marketing. I'll talk about this as being called a topic SME. You have to get, I'll actually just go through this. So you're the one topic SME. So this could be like, let's say it's compete. It might oftentimes be product marketing. If it's industry, you might have an industry specialist, whatever it is, the person who is an expert on whatever the topic of the play is. You have to have an audience SME. And I often will advise that this is either a frontline manager or a top performer, someone that can be an advocate for whoever this play is being designed for. And then you have an enablement SME. It might be that you have a dedicated enablement team, or it might be someone that you're kind of, having play that role for this purpose. But you need to get these three people in a room, and these are the three people that build out the guidance. From a lot of the workshops that I've done, where you have the most success is where you have a great audience SME in the room, because I oftentimes see marketing and enablement kind of going back and forth, debating certain things. And, at the end of the day, it's up to the person who is going to be using that play. And if they're not going to adopt that or utilize it, then it doesn't matter. And so having that person in the room is super, super constructive. Okay, so then one thing that I will advise is we kind of have this framework in building out plays, and we answer 6 foundational questions to help understand what play are we building, what is the scope of it, who's this intended for, how should it be used. I'll go through these pretty quickly. This is all kind of part of that workshop that I talked about that we'll do. But the first one is that you have to understand why you're building the play. This is oftentimes going to be tied to a business metric. There's 3 who's, your audience, your customer, and who's building the play. When the play will get used, and the WIFI. How many people have heard of WIFM? Yeah. So this is a little tweak on it. What's in it for you? A little bit different, talking to the end user of the play. So for those questions, why, what business goal or metrics are we trying to drive? So if it's compete, it might be increase your competitive win rate. Who is the internal audience? Pick one. You can have different levels of granularity, but I will often advise that you shouldn't have one play that's for your SDR and your AEs and your success, because they're not having the same types of conversations. Now, you might get more granular and say, okay, this is a play for AEs, and then we want to build out another one for AEs for, APAC, AEs for EMEA. That's another level of granularity, but at a minimum, if there's no crossover between the functions, then it needs to be specific to one audience. Who is the customer? So who are they going and having the conversation with? These are always things about the customer or buyer that don't change. So their persona, the industry that they're in, not where they're at in the buyer's journey. And I'll talk about that in a second. Who are the builders? So these are identifying the 3 SMEs, the topic, the audience, and the enablement SME that I talked about. When, so in what situation should this play be run? So if it's a compete play, when you're up against a competitor, right? If it's an industry play, when you're selling to that industry, or when you're working with a customer in that industry. And then what's the WIFI? This one is super important. There's one person that can write the WIFI, and not approve the WIFI, but write the WIFI, and it's the audience SME. They are the person that's going to understand what's in it for the end user, and they should be the one to articulate that. And it's super important that you capture it directly from that audience me and not make it up and ask them to say, does this look right? Have it come directly from their mouth. Okay, so I wanted to give some examples of what this actually looks like if you were to implement this using technology. I know everything we've been talking about is kind of conceptual. So I wanted to show some examples. So this is kind of a navigation of different plays. So like we said, objection, product, event, competitor. We've talked a little bit about a compete play. So this is, you can see as an example of what to know, what to say, what to show. And the thing that's really nice here is that you can see that you're actually leveraging assets that the team probably has access to today, but probably has a hard time finding in moment of action. So a battle card, competitive intel insights. The thing that's really nice here is that if someone doesn't want to go and read the whole battle card, you have like strengths and weaknesses that are just popped out there so that if someone wants to skim, they can see that really easily. What to say, again, you have talking points, you have objection handling, and then what to show, that's going to be the actual content surfaced, always up to date, always in real time for that specific scenario. Another thing that's really nice is that you can take these plays and you can put it within the existing workflow of your customer-facing team. So in this scenario, we've actually taken this competitive play and we've targeted it to CRM opportunity because we know that this opportunity, we're up against this competitor. So it's an example of how you can do that. So when they're in the op, in that moment of action, you have the compete play right in front of you. And you can put this basically anywhere that they live. So measuring business impact, and this is kind of where I think a lot of the magic comes into play, because for the first time we have this tangible item that Enablement can show on how they're taking this strategy like competitive differentiation or a new acquisition and how you're actually landing it internally and externally. And so we've thought a lot about how do you actually measure that and how do you build out scorecards that show what success looks like so that you can have a conversation with, C-level or the executives within your organization to show how enablement's impacting that strategy. So I put together a little bit of a guidance workflow to give you a sense of kind of what that looks like for how you measure success and kind of the workshop that we take companies through. So what we first like to do, you'll see this is going to be the prioritize, build, deliver, and optimize categories. But we like to identify what are the growth initiatives, what are the different triggers, so compete, industry, those types of things, and then actually building out a guidance map that has launch dates and what the priority order is. You build out the plays using the 6 foundational questions, the know, say, show, do framework. We identify the governance and the validation of those plays. You deliver them to your internal teams. They deliver that content or the messaging to the customer. And then we'll provide analytics and a play scorecard and a guidance scorecard to help overall optimize that process. And the bottom right corner where you see that play scorecard and guidance scorecard is where you can get those really great insights that are essentially leading indicators to the business metrics. So if you want to look at competitive win rate, instead of having to wait until the end of the quarter, the end of the year to see if you did increase that win rate, you're able to see, do they know about the competitor? Are they saying the right things? Are they showing the right things? Is it landing with the customer so that you can, again, iterate or course correct before you have to look at the end metric? And so this is kind of the workflow that we have. I wanted to just kind of share that. I know we only had 30 minutes today, so couldn't go super deep in these areas. But at the end of the day, this is all about showing the business impact of enablement and help taking that strategy and put it into action. And the business outcomes that we've seen for a lot of the companies that we've worked with are increased win rates, renewal rates, deal velocity, and overall better buyer customer satisfaction. So the last piece of advice that I will give is that you actually have to think in a different way when you use guidance. It really causes you to go, okay, let's have a different conversation. Let's bring the 3 SMEs in the room. What is the content? What's the guidance? What's the trigger? What are the 6 foundational questions? What are the plays that we're building? It actually causes you to think and work in a different way. And what I've seen is that it actually helps drive alignment across your organization, and it actually helps the different teams that might think in different ways have a place to come together and have one common language to be able to execute that strategy. And so that's why I wanted to focus on guidance today. And hopefully you guys have learned some tools and tips of things that you can take back to your teams today. And if you want to learn more about it, we're right outside here over to the right, and we're happy to answer any questions.